In this presentation, we will take a look at other sections, other items that don't fall into the standard flows, the standard cycles, including the vendor cycle, the customer cycle, and the employee cycle, but which are really important still and items that we use often within QuickBooks Online. As we do so, we will make a comparison to the desktop version because the desktop version does have that pictorial homepage that shows the flowchart with these other items, and also because some people might be used to the desktop version. Once we see that flowchart, then we'll apply that over as well to the online version and be able to match them up. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. Remember that we will be using the test drive version. You can look up the QuickBooks Online test drive, and that's what we will be using at this time. We're in the Craig's Design and Landscaping Services. We're going to be thinking about the plus icon up top, or select the plus icon up top. And we're looking into those items that don't fall into a particular section, a particular cost flow, or a particular cycle, like the customer cycle or the sales cycle, the vendor cycle or the bill cycle or the accounts payable cycle, the employee cycle, these other items over here. To talk about why this might be the case, let's go over to the desktop version where we will have that home page and we'll have that flow chart to help us out. So we're going to go to the desktop version. This is not the online version, but it is an Intuit software. It is QuickBooks, and we'll see most of these icons as well in the online version. So we've got this flow chart in the home page. Here we have the vendors, the customers, the employees, the standard cycles that we have looked at. We are concentrating on the other items now, including the company items, the banking items. Now, these are going to be items that don't fall directly into the vendor section, the customer section, and the employee section, but which QuickBooks thinks, or Intuit thinks, the designers of the software think are important enough to put on the home page, so they're going to be used often. And you might ask, well, if they're important and we're going to use them often, why don't they fall into a typical cycle that we would have? And the answer to that is that some of them might be part of the setup process, so they're kind of the back end, they're kind of the things that we need to use in order to set up, including lists. And some of them may be items that are going to be included in multiple cycles, so we couldn't put them into one particular area. You can see that most notably here on the customer section where we have the deposits. In the banking section, they couldn't put it into the customer section, or didn't want to on the on-ground version or desktop version, because they didn't feel that every deposit would be a customer deposit, and so they put it over here with a little flow chart. So those are the two main reasons why that might be the case. In the desktop version, these are the two sections that are labeled out, and the items that are thought to be most important to then put on the home page of it. First item is the chart of accounts. This is going to be one of those setup items. The chart of accounts are going to be one of the first things we need to start going, and that's going to be the accounts that we will use in order to post transactions to. In the online version or the desktop version, we often call these a list. So in the drop-downs, they'll be included in the lists drop-down, and the main list we have is the chart of accounts. Then we're not going to go into the inventory activities. We've got the items and services. That's another type of list, very important type of list. So if we go into the drop-down, we have the item list. So if you hear the term list, you may not hear it as much on the online version, but on the desktop version, these are items that people use QuickBooks a lot, will start to call just lists, item lists. So the chart of account and the item lists. And that's going to be the things that will drive what we input into things like the invoices and the create sales receipts. So it's, again, one of those setup, one of those back-end type things, one of the things we need to get set up properly in order to easily process the create invoice and the sales receipts. We won't go into the order checks or the time tracking. The calendar is useful. Some people find it very useful, but we won't take a look at that at this point. We're going to go down to the banking section instead and take a look at what we have there, including, of course, the record deposit. So the record deposit is going to be very important. We're going to use that often. And you would hope that it fits kind of into the customer section, because we're hoping that the deposits come from customers that we are then depositing into the bank. But we may be depositing our own money into the bank, or taking a loan and depositing it into the bank as well. We then have the reconciliation. The typical thing we reconcile is the bank account. So this is a quick way to go to that reconciliation process. Most people probably see that in the banking dropdown in the desktop version to reconcile, but it's really important, and so it's something that we should do every month, and it's therefore assigned here on the home page. We've got the write checks, so if we select this item, we have the write checks here, and that's going to be very important, so it's on the home page. Once again, you would think that the write checks would be, if we close that back out, in possibly the vendors section, because usually we write checks to the vendors, which I believe in the online version we'll see it grouped in that grouping. In the desktop version, they put it into the banking, because clearly we can write checks for many different reasons, any kind of check we wrote for the outflow. So in here, they put it into the banking activities. Then we have the check register. So the check register is an alternative method that we can enter data into and see the detail in the checking account. Most balance sheet accounts have a similar register, but of course the check register is going to be the most important one and the one most people are most familiar with. So it is included in the home page. We've got the print checks and we've got the enter credit card charges. We're not going to get into too much detail on them at this point. Now let's go back to the online version and see if we can match this up and what kind of comparisons we have with the online version. If we hit the plus item up top, we've already looked at the customer, vendor, and employee section. In the other section up top, we once again have that bank deposits, and that is the item that didn't really fit as clearly in the customer section. Even in the online version, they couldn't bring themselves to put it into the customer section, and we have it over here in the other section. But of course, the flow, what we hope happens is we have an invoice, then receive payment, and then we deposit, or we have a sales receipt and then deposit. And we're going to group those deposits together. That's when it goes into the bank. We have transfer. If we're going to transfer funds, we won't get into too much detail on that at this time. We've got the journal entry, and this is a really important section that wasn't on the homepage in the desktop version. This is where we default. If we can't find anywhere else to put something, we put it into a journal entry. In other words, if we're doing some type of transaction that doesn't happen regularly, doesn't fall into the normal flow, then we have to use debits and credits. And notice this whole system is set up to not use debits and credits. If we have everything set up well, we can have someone put in this information without knowing debits and credits. But if we're looking at a transaction that's more complicated, doesn't happen all the time, then we need to default to the journal entry, which will basically use debits and credits. When would that happen? Maybe if we bought equipment or something like that and we financed the equipment, then we would have to put the equipment on the books, and we would have to put the loan on the books, and we would have to put any cash paid on the books. That would be more complex of a transaction, and we might need to use a journal entry. It might be easier to use a journal entry. So things that don't happen all the time, we might need to use a journal entry. It might be simpler to do. Things that don't use cash are often things that could be in a journal entry form would be the best way to do it. Adjusting entries as well would be the best thing to do. And then we have statements and inventory adjustments. We're not going to get into these items at this time. So there was a few other items on the home page on the desktop that wasn't included in here, were not included in here. One was the chart of accounts. And this kind of makes sense for the online version. It makes sense that something like the chart of accounts wouldn't be in these sections. These are typically activities that we're going to do for the most part. They're typically things that are going to create journal entries, affect the financial statements. The chart of accounts is basically the creation of the financial statements. So once again, like the back end type stuff. So it would make sense that it would be in some other area. That's going to be in the accounting area down here. So if we go into accounting, we're looking for the chart of accounts. The chart of accounts has the name of the account, the type of the account, and it's typically going to be sorted by account type, mainly assets, liabilities, equity, income, and expenses, broken out in a bit more detail than that. Assets including cash, accounts receivable, and so on. We'll take a look at that more at a later time. We also had on the desktop version something called an item list, items and services, and we called those lists. They were under lists in the desktop version. In the online version, we're going to find those under sales, and we're going to go to products and services. So if we went to sales, we see the tabs up top, products and services. And that's going to be the same thing as the items, in essence, in the desktop version. These are going to be the things that we're going to set up that we will then sell. So that if we're a service item, if we were doing bookkeeping, then our service items would be bookkeeping. If we sell inventory, we're going to set up the inventory items. Later on, we're going to make inventory items related to guitars. We buy and sell guitars. These then would be the items that we would set up. Very important, these items, because they're going to drive the invoices, the creation of the invoices, the creation of the purchase orders, the creation of the sales receipts. Another item on the home page of the desktop version was the bank reconciliation or the reconciliations. And in the online version, that is going to be under accounting and then reconcile. So if we go to accounting, we go to the reconcile tab, we'll have the reconciliations. This is going to be one of the major internal controls over cash. So that's why the desktop version sees it important to put it on the home page on the desktop. It is something that every company should do, large and small. We'll take a look more at the bank reconciliations as we go through our data input process. The desktop version also had the check register on the home page, and that of course is another very important piece. The check register, typically for the cash account, the check register of course would be in the banking section. So if we go to the banking section, we've got this item which will show the transactions, but we will go to directly the check register to the right here. Go to the register, and then we'll see the register information, the basic kind of register type of format where we have the payments and the deposits, something that we might be more used to if we're just reconciling our accounts in something like a checkbook. So that's a summary of some of the other major items within QuickBooks Online. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.